Hello people, in today's story we have a guy who went to the world of cultivation goddesses with his cell phone. Comment what you think he's going to do with this. The desperate guy sends a message to his friends saying he traveled in time and asks for urgent help. Suddenly he is surrounded by some creatures' bravas while a goddess watches everything from above, very irritated. The goddess looks at him with an angry face and asks if he stole food and caused all this chaos. With her eyes shining and super angry, the goddess demands to know how he is going to pay for all the mess he made. The protagonist doesn't understand anything, picks up his cell phone, and is shocked by everything happening around him without knowing what to do. He realizes that he really traveled through time but never imagined it would be like this crazy way. Then a truck appears coming at high speed, almost running him over, and he realizes he is in another dimension. The guy is shocked when the truck almost catches him and realizes he is no longer in the world he knows. He almost gets run over and wonders how anyone could run a red light in such a hurry. A giant dog comes at him while a girl screams at him to get out of there quickly, but he can only stand there thinking. The giant dog appears out of nowhere and hits the boy with everything. He doesn't even see where the blow came from and falls to the ground in pain. The girl doesn't stop screaming, as if that would help anything. Meanwhile, he flies away trying to understand what just happened. He lands straight into an open hole in the middle of the street. He disappears from sight before anyone can do anything. The hole had cones and a sign showing that it was a construction site, but no one knows where it ended up or what happened inside. The girl and her friend look on without really understanding. Only then do they realize that it was the dog that threw him away like that. Meanwhile, he thinks that his great adventure began by being knocked out by a giant dog just the way he didn't want to. Inside the hole, he comes face to face with a different dog. This one has a horn in the middle of its forehead, which just makes everything weirder. The dog with the horn starts to approach. He wonders if he is going crazy, or if this is a bizarre dream, one of those very realistic ones. He soon realizes that he is surrounded by several strange creatures. They stare at him as if he were the one in the wrong one. He doesn't even know what to do. He puts his hand to his face trying to understand if it's real or just in his head, but nothing makes sense. He just wants to get out of there soon. The dog with a horn approaches and licks his face. He freezes immediately, trying to understand what is happening. Before he can react, a giant frog appears out of nowhere. He throws strange sparks that make the boy even more nervous. He tries to get away from the dog but soon realizes that he is surrounded. The frog's electricity seems to hit him and everything becomes even more confusing. He lets out a somewhat desperate scream but tries to remain calm. Looking closely, it seems like those creatures don't want to hurt anyone. All around you can see fences and more different animals. He starts to put the pieces together to try to understand where he is. He decides to take a deep breath and pick up his cell phone. Maybe that would help make sense, or at least explain how it got there. Hopefully you still have a signal, but when you try to use it, an error message appears. Something is definitely out of the ordinary. Finding everything very strange, he uses his cell phone to try to identify the animals. The result leaves him even more confused. The device says that the dog is of an unknown species and warns that an artificial intelligence entity has been detected. Without understanding anything, he checks the date on his cell phone. It's the same as when it all started. It just makes him think even more about what's going on. He carefully stretches out his finger and touches the giant frog. The other hand holds the cell phone. He is curious, but also a little afraid. As soon as he touches the frog, he gets a shock like that. He quickly moves away, trying to understand how a frog can release electricity. Still scared, he decides to try calling the police. He types the number on his cell phone, hoping someone will answer. Even with a signal, the call does not go through. He looks at the device, frustrated, without understanding what is wrong this time. He starts to wonder if this is another world or just a crazy dream. Nothing makes sense, and he feels more and more lost. Suddenly a huge claw appears in the air with a mysterious voice that says, "You are in the immortal spiritual mountain." It freezes. The voice explains that it is an ancient sect over 2,000 years old. As a huge bird begins to fly around him, he looks at everything, thinking if it's a prank or some kind of weird show. He needs to find a way out of there quickly. Without many options, he touches a door full of glowing symbols. Maybe it will lead outside, or at least show a way. The moment he touches it, he is thrown into the air. The door explodes with energy, and he finds himself floating without control. He falls head first into a pile of dirt. After being thrown through the magic door, he slowly gets up with his head spinning. The dog with the horn appears again, along with the bird. They don't seem happy and complain that he invaded the animal area. He looks at his hand and notices strange smoke coming out of it. It seems like something has changed inside him, and it makes him uneasy. As he tries to understand all this, he realizes that nothing there resembles the technology. He knows everything is different and strange. He begins to think that he may have traveled through time, but he still decides to try to send a message to a friend using his cell phone. He sits on the grass with his head full of doubts. The dog stands nearby, watching with a look that seems curious and attentive. He tries to use his cell phone, but the feeling of being stared at doesn't help much. The dog remains silent, but doesn't take his eyes off him. Suddenly, the dog comes back bringing a bowl of food and puts it in front of him, as if he wants to help after everything that has happened. He thanks you for your kindness, but says he's not hungry. He remains focused on his cell phone, trying to understand what to do next. The dog insists, pushing the bowl closer. He seems determined to get the boy to eat something at that moment. He says he knows how to eat alone, but he's not hungry. He refuses the pot with a firm gesture without even looking at what's inside. Soon after, his stomach rumbles loudly, revealing that he is hungry, yet he insists on acting stubborn as if everything was fine. He states that he would rather starve than eat dog food. He makes a disgusted expression as he pushes the bowl away. He decides to pick up his cell phone and open the chat. He decides to tell his friends that he ended up in a farming world and ask for help to get out of there. With the virtual keyboard, he writes quickly explaining the situation. He wants someone to believe him before he goes completely crazy. Feel relieved to still have internet and battery. Before anything, post about what you are experiencing just to record. He says that he appears to have traveled through time and is now trapped, surrounded by spiritual animals. The messages go directly to the group. Friends are impressed by what they see, but find it difficult to believe the story. It seems like something made up or a joke. To prove it, he points his cell phone and shows the giant dog and the electric frog. He films everything, trying to make it clear that it's not a lie. At the end, he also films the strange bird, but as he looks at it, he wonders if it is real or if he is losing his mind. The protagonist is shocked by the situation, wondering if all this is really happening. His friends are shocked by the videos, confirming that he has indeed traveled through time and want to come along. The protagonist and his friends conclude that the cell phone's internet still works even though they don't know which world they are in. He realizes that he needs to find a way to charge his cell phone and understand the world he finds himself in. The protagonist sees a large amount of food but discovers that it is all dog food and is of no use to him. He says he only told about time travel to his best friends who he had played with since college. One image features Ashin, engineer and technology genius, who always offers the best technical support. The following image shows Planner.io, who is always involved in reviews with clients and likes twists and turns. And the last presentation is by Alyong Otaku and streamer who knows several ways to travel through time but has never done it. The protagonist realizes that he is not alone in this situation, with the presence of his friends to help him. His friends send him an improvised guide on how to assemble a generator. In the chat, they ask if he can use the electric frog to do so. He looks at his cell phone battery, and it is at 86%. He switches to 3G mode to save a little, while he tries to solve the problem. In the group, they warn him not to risk using animals to charge his cell phone. They recommend that he follow a safe guide system. He tries to call something like Great Sage or Time Travel System. He even tries Xiao AI, but nothing happens. Everything stays still. With no response from the system, a friend suggests something unexpected, tells him to evolve by eating animals or defeating monsters. He freezes. Walks up to a huge monster with red eyes, trying to understand if this is what they were suggesting. Everything seems insane. With a confused face, he asks in the chat if they want him to kill monsters. He can't believe this idea came from them. Another friend suggests he look for artifacts while continuing to walk near the giant creatures in the enclosure. He stops for a moment, looks around, and thinks, I wonder if you can use friends as a kind of cheat system. The idea of having his friends as a cheat system makes him laugh to himself, but at the same time he tries to understand how it could work. He gets frustrated trying to understand what's going on. Even his friends don't seem to be able to explain it properly, and this makes him even angrier. Ashwan comments in the group that the opening of his time travel was a disaster. This only increases his discouragement at that moment. Called Moang by his friends, he says that this is life. He says he should have died by now, showing how discouraged he is. 7 hours trapped in the pen, he complains about being hungry due to the smell of the animals, and only having dog food to eat nothing is easy. Even though he finds the food tasteless, he ends up eating it. He feels a warm energy running through his body as if it were something magical. Moang regrets it. He says he misses the air conditioning of anime, and everything he left behind. He can't stand that place anymore. Suddenly a shining door with magical symbols appears in front of him. It seems to be a way out, finally a chance for hope. He walks through the door with his heart racing, and comes face to face with 3 figures. One of them is the goddess he saw before. This surprises him. Before leaving, he hugs the dog with a horn. He thanks him for everything he did for him, even though he doesn't fully understand the situation. The goddess watches from afar with a look full of mystery, as he makes the decision to move on to explore the new world. The goddess opens her mouth, as if she was going to say something important. Everyone looks attentive. But she just lets out a phew, like she's relieved. He notices that her bust attracts attention, and immediately turns red. He hides awkwardly and shyly calls her a fairy. She and her apprentices begin checking the enclosure. They ensure that the spirit animals are being well looked after as always. The goddess looks at the records and realizes that something doesn't add up. Remember that those animals are essential to their sect. An apprentice tells her not to worry. She states that not even a mosquito can enter the enclosure, leaving the goddess calmer. Another apprentice begins to introduce the spiritual animals, shows the thunder frog, which is level 3 and summons storms and lightning. Soon after, the mystical 3-eyed raven appears. This is level 2 and is used to transform talismans into powerful objects. They explain that the sect is called Immortal Spiritual Mountain, with 2,500 years of history, while introducing the person responsible for the animals. They arrive at the dog. He is level 4 and helps to grow plants and take care of other animals. The goddess seems satisfied with everything. The apprentice asks the goddess to touch the dog's fur. She says it is super soft, and it's worth feeling how incredible it is. He is pulled by one of the apprentices, who looks at him suspiciously, while the goddess and the giant dog watch without understanding much. Trying to improvise, he introduces himself. He says that it is a new spiritual animal, and that it is a humanoid with teleportation ability. Without waiting for a response, he runs towards the door. He wants to escape before they find out he's lying. His speed is impressive. He leaves only a trail of smoke behind, while everyone is surprised by what just happened. An apprentice wonders if there really is a spirit animal like him in the enclosure, since he looks much more like a human. Another begins to connect the dots and realizes that he could be an invader. Have him captured before he escapes for good. They are scared when they realize that he managed to escape. The surprise becomes clear as they try to come up with a quick plan. One tries to capture him with a whip, but he effortlessly dodges, running away even faster with a determined look. The apprentices send their spirit animals after him as he runs. Running away has now become his only option. The apprentice screams with determination for them to capture him alive, while the others prepare to act quickly. A call appears on his cell phone. It's from his friends telling him that his grandfather is calling somehow. He answers the call while running, shows his friends that he is running away in the middle of a crazy chase. His friends can't believe he's calling in the middle of this. They want to know how he can do this while being attacked. After a lot of running, he arrives at the exit panting, but relieved to have barely escaped the enclosure. He sees a wall and decides to run there. He believes that point could be his chance to escape for good. In his mind, it's all or nothing. If he can reach that place, maybe he can lose everyone who is after him. Suddenly, a beam of green energy passes through the air and goes straight towards him, taking him by surprise. The beam hits him and a cut appears on his face. He feels the pain and realizes that the situation is getting even more serious. He stops for a second in surprise. The cut makes him think about what he might be facing and the danger he is in. A crow enveloped in green energy begins to surround him, making it clear that it is a very powerful spiritual animal. He looks around and realizes that he is surrounded by several other animals with red eyes and a very scary appearance. Suddenly, the goddess appears and asks what he is doing there, accusing him of being from a rival sect. She looks at one of the apprentices and says that if anyone managed to get in the security of that place is a fiasco. The apprentice apologizes and promises that she will capture him to find out exactly what happened. One of them deduces that he must be a cultivator capable of crossing a level 4 energy barrier. He begins to prepare to fight while he sees the apprentice activating talismans that increase her protection speed and strength. She appears confidently saying she will test his skills in combat. He realizes that things have gotten serious, and thinks that this world is much more dangerous than he imagined as he tries to come up with a plan. The apprentice realizes that he does not show spiritual energy, and concludes that he is hiding something or is much stronger than he appears. A crow with green energy appears around him, making it clear that it is a powerful and dangerous spiritual animal. He looks around and notices that several other animals are there with red eyes and a very scary appearance. The goddess suddenly appears and asks what he is doing there, accusing him of being a spy for another sect. She stares at one of the apprentices and comments that if anyone managed to get into the security of the place, it would be a real joke. The apprentice is embarrassed and promises to capture him as quickly as possible to understand what happened. One of them observes the situation and deduces that he must be a cultivator capable of passing through a high-level energy barrier. He begins to prepare to fight while he sees the apprentice activating talismans that increase his strength, speed, and protection. The girl approaches full of confidence, saying she wants to test what he really knows how to do. He realizes that things have gotten ugly and thinks that this world is much more dangerous than he imagined. The apprentice notices that he does not emit any sign of spiritual energy and concludes that he is hiding something or is very strong. The apprentice positions herself to attack, remembering that she cannot make mistakes again in front of the goddess, making it clear that she is under pressure. He adjusts his feet to dodge and is ready to react quickly to what is coming. She shouts at him to avoid it, warning him that she is keeping an eye on his movements and will not take it easy. He tries to duck but is hit by a blow that proves that she is faster and stronger. On the ground he begs, saying he doesn't know anything, and promises to kneel to prove he's not a threat. A crow appears out of nowhere and pecks at his head while the apprentices catch him and leave him completely defenseless. Tied up, he tries to understand how he managed to invade the enclosure even without having spiritual energy. The goddess looks at the apprentice and asks what is missing from the enclosure with a serious and concerned tone. One of them responds that spiritual plants and food are missing and already points him as the culprit. She looks at him angrily, asking why he broke in and stole things, showing that she is frustrated. He complains that it is impossible to eat so much food and begs for mercy, saying that he is just a human trying to explain himself. One of the apprentices examines him and concludes that he has no spiritual energy and that he is just an ordinary mortal with no powers. The goddess is surprised and comments that if he passed her, only someone very strong or some elders could do that. She gives him 7 days to help fix the bills in the enclosure and still has to give a good explanation for what happened. The goddess creates a sphere of blue energy, showing her magic and implying that he will not escape punishment. The sphere hits him straight, showing that her patience is over and that there will be no more chances of escape. She imposes a restriction, saying that if he tries to leave the sect, his body and soul will be destroyed without mercy. Then she orders them to find out how he got in and orders them to erase his memory and send him back to the mortal world. One of the apprentices complains about the mess, and another already blames him for the problems and confusion in auditing the accounts. An apprentice suggests using a soul transfer technique to put all the blame on him and end the mess. Baiji had no idea what a shock it would be to enter the mind of a 21st century otaku full of energy and chaos. She is amazed at what she finds inside, showing confusion and surprise at everything that invades her vision. A plane takes off in his mind, and she thinks it's a limited vision for someone with such an unusual mind. Mo Wang's head is full of old videos from the 21st century and a consciousness that seems very strange. Suddenly she sees herself as a knight as the plane flies and thinks that if the tower holds up she will too. Attacks appear out of nowhere in her mind, throwing several blows of energy that she tries to face without stopping. A giant monster appears, showing a frightening creature with enormous power and sharp teeth. She realizes that his mind is in total chaos, and a huge robot appears next to the monster as if it were an ally. She looks at the robot and thinks it is a Xuanji sect battle puppet, but much bigger than she imagined. A missile appears flying towards her, and she tries to dodge quickly, showing that the fight is still far from over. A nuclear explosion appears in his mind, spreading chaos and destruction as if it were an absurd mental attack. Baiji is surrounded by photos of the goddess robot and other confusing moments of his head being completely lost. She tries to understand what is happening, and decides to focus on what seems to attract the most attention in the protagonist's thoughts. With her fingers she activates a meditation technique to try to calm herself in the midst of all that mental confusion. After concentrating she mutters, "Oh well," as if she was ready to continue exploring that mess. Suddenly an image of a woman's lips appears showing the protagonist's most intimate thoughts. Soon after female legs dressed in stockings appear clearly showing a certain attraction for this type of detail. A scene appears of a man hugging a woman with a message about a husband not finding out, leaving the atmosphere tense. Another image appears showing more women's stockings with a caption that says, "I promise you," revealing deeper desires. Finally scenes appear with subtitles such as "Yamit, Sumamason," and "Oh God please," showing the most chaotic side of his mind. The apprentice is shocked, thinking if everything she saw in his mind was real, and concludes that he is a scoundrel. She tries again to touch his forehead to access his mind, but this time she can't get in. He kneels panting, making it clear that entering his mind was a very intense experience. An apprentice next to her asks if she is okay, and what exactly she saw showing concern. She says she doesn't have enough skill to remember everything clearly, still trying to understand. He is surprised and suggests that he can try using a soul-searching technique to investigate further. She stops him, saying it's better to forget it, because going in there isn't safe at all. The protagonist suddenly wakes up, opening his eyes and looking around in fear. He takes a step back and asks no one to come close, looking terrified of what happened. The apprentice comments that it entered his head, but that he regained consciousness quickly, as if his soul were very strong. The protagonist is standing in the middle of a magic circle, while the apprentices watch him with worried looks. An apprentice comments that since he heard everything and didn't reveal anything useful, they can't let him stay, and is preparing to act. Another says they will erase his memory, and then throw him off the mountain with no chance of returning. An energy begins to shine when the apprentice tries to attack, while the protagonist dodges desperately. He shouts, asking them to wait, saying he can balance all the accounts in 7 days, and begs for a chance. The apprentice laughs, saying that a mortal would never be able to fix anything, not even something as basic as bills. A firm voice calls for calm, as Baiji suggests that perhaps giving it 7 days is best to see what he can do. She comments that his mind is something out of the ordinary, hinting that perhaps there is something interesting hidden there. Even so, she can't help but say that he has no shame showing what he saw in his mind. The apprentice sighs and agrees, saying that if she believes, then they will give him 7 days to try to resolve everything. The protagonist is sitting on the floor with his bare feet, still processing what happened after being saved by the apprentice. An apprentice warns him that he has 7 days to correct his accounts, or his memory will be erased, and he will be thrown off the mountain. He looks confident, and asks what happens if he manages to fix everything, surprising the apprentices with his determination. The apprentice promises that if he settles the bills he will help him get off the mountain, and will even fulfill any request he makes. They point to a small house near the enclosure, and tell him he can stay there while they bring him the records. He enters the house and feels a little relief when he sees that he finally has a place to rest and organize his ideas. When he picks up his cell phone, he realizes that the battery is almost running out because of the voice call he made during the chase. With the peaceful place, he celebrates finally having time to think, but knows the work will be difficult. His friends in the chat appear and say that they heard everything that happened, reminding him that he needs to settle the bills soon. Baiji, lying on the bed, murmurs that she is still confused and exhausted after everything she saw in his mind that day. The protagonist realizes that he needs to understand the sex finances and review the accounts if he wants to resolve the mess. One of the apprentices asks how the money is being spent, curious about the numbers and what could have gone wrong. He confesses that in addition to focusing on immortality, he likes to write books and considers this his great hobby. He says he met a man who said he was the son of a publishing house owner and that he needed help getting home. The apprentice believes in the promise of the man who guaranteed great rewards and even helped to publish his book. He explains that he only needed 300 spiritual coins to secure a place at the publisher, thinking it was a good opportunity. The protagonist gets frustrated and asks if he stole from the pen to give this guy money. The apprentice guarantees that as soon as his book is published he will pay for everything, demonstrating confidence in his bet. The protagonist insists on knowing if the man gave a deadline or got back in touch, making clear his distrust. The apprentice shows a token saying it is a family heirloom, something they only share with trusted people. The protagonist takes the token and realizes that it is chipped, concluding that the apprentice was deceived, and lets out a sigh of frustration. The other tries to argue that this doesn't make sense because the man wrote to him later proving that he was trustworthy. One of the apprentices takes a letter confirming that the guy got in touch after the first request for money. In the letter, the man says he needs more coins and that his father liked the manuscript, asking for another 200 coins to advance. The protagonist doesn't believe what he hears and asks if he really sent more money, finding it all very naive. The apprentice admits that he sent money 6 times in total, totaling 3,060 coins, but believes that the effort will be worth it. The protagonist asks how long it would take for someone to go to the address on the letter, wanting to check the story. The apprentice estimates that the trip would take just over a month and remembers that the man left 2.5 months ago. The protagonist does the math and says that it was obvious that he should have already concluded that it was all a scam. Only then does the apprentice realize that he was truly deceived and begins to despair without knowing what to do next. The protagonist asks why he doesn't fly with his sword to get there faster, and asks how long it would take to reach the address. The apprentice says that using the flying sword he can arrive in 1 day, showing that he has a much faster way of traveling. He suggests that the apprentice fly there, recover the money, and stop sending more, showing impatience with the situation. The apprentice picks up his sword with determination, ready to go after the scammer, and try to solve the problem once and for all. The protagonist holds his clothes and asks to wait, showing that he is worried about the other's impulsive attitude. He suggests that he hand over all the money he has left to avoid further losses, and asks if he has any specific materials. The learner gets confused and asks why he wants these materials while trying to list everything he can have out loud. He comments that the sect's workshop has all the items he mentioned and asks how that can help. The protagonist says he needs these materials to try to balance his accounts and asks to be taken to the workshop. He reassures the apprentice by promising to help and then introducing him as a new disciple, asking him to avoid further confusion. The protagonist and the apprentice fly together towards the sect's workshop, heading towards a high point in the mountain. The apprentice leads the way while the protagonist follows him, observing the place carefully. They arrive at a red building with a sign full of symbols in Chinese indicating that it is the workshop. As soon as they enter, they find a man sleeping, and the apprentice gets angry while the protagonist just watches confused. The apprentice calls the man uncle and starts poking his forehead, trying to wake him up as quickly as possible. He insists that he needs help and asks his uncle to pay attention to the protagonist and his situation. The apprentice explains that the protagonist is a new disciple and needs some equipment, showing the list. Then he says that he has other things to deal with and asks his uncle to take care of the protagonist and send him back later. The man reads the list and makes a comment about an electric pump, making it clear that he is surprised by the request. The protagonist is surprised to hear that and begins to wonder if the sect really has this type of technology. The man explains that copper wires and magnets generate electricity and says that they use electric bombs as traps. He shows a device that generates continuous electricity and explains that it works for 2 days using spiritual stones. Then he says he will give the protagonist an apprentice robe, a cultivation manual, and an allowance of 30 spirit coins. He asks you to place your hand on the stone to leave a spiritual impression that is used to collect the sect's resources. The protagonist places his hand in a circle full of glowing runes while trying to understand how the sect's system works. His hand starts to emit a bright glow, showing that the registration is being done successfully. After a few seconds, the screen confirms Mo Wang's name and officially registers him as a member of the sect. The man hands over the device and goes back to sleep while the protagonist prepares to test it. He carefully decides to use the generator's lowest setting to ensure everything works well. The device starts emitting energy, and he connects it to his cell phone in order to charge it quickly. The cell phone starts to charge, and he is super happy to finally have power again. He tells his friends in chat that the battery is back, and they start talking about how difficult it must be to travel through time. One friend tells him to win over girls and become a dragon, while another insists he focus on getting back. Another comments that returning may be impossible, and that he may even need to cultivate to achieve. Someone in the chat asks him to take photos of the cultivation manual, while another says he wants to see the content soon. He takes photos of the book and sends them to the group, and his friends are excited and curious about what he sent. While reading the manual, he feels a headache because of so much information and decides to take a break. He takes out his cell phone and thinks if he should relax a little before continuing studying. A friend criticizes him, saying that he should be farming instead of using his cell phone, but he responds by asking what his friend is doing. Then he reads the definition of cultivation and realizes that the first step is to create a spiritual platform to absorb energy. The manual explains that the breathing technique helps to calm the mind and feel spiritual energy by focusing only on breathing. He begins to practice by closing his eyes and trying to concentrate on the energy around him, showing that he is truly dedicated. For a moment he feels something and thinks it might be a cultivation genius, starting to get excited about the idea. But soon he loses focus and no longer feels anything, trying to gain energy without success, becoming frustrated. He insists even though he is tired, but he still cannot guide the energy into his body, which leaves him even more exhausted. Without being able to absorb anything, he recognizes that cultivation is much more difficult than it seemed and feels disappointed. The manual says that whoever gets it the first time is amazing, but that for most people it takes time and effort. It also explains that there are elixirs and treasures that can help those who have difficulty by providing an alternative. He wonders where he could find something so rare and realizes that he will need money for any solution. Exhausted, he ends up sleeping while his electric pump is ready to be used, showing that he is planning his next steps. A door opens and you can hear footsteps approaching, showing that someone is coming. The apprentice's legs appear in the half-open door, showing that she is entering his room without permission. He is sleeping heavily, and a voice says he must be very tired by the way he blacked out. Baiji can't resist his curiosity and decides to take a quick peek into his mind. She puts a light on his forehead using the same technique as before, trying to read his thoughts while he sleeps. Suddenly he wakes up scared by the light and realizes that she was trying something. Baiji takes a step forward, but he raises his hand, stopping her in fright, still confused by the situation. The tension between the two feels like an invisible barrier that no one wants to cross. A lit window indicates that it is almost midnight while the two are still there in the room. She asks why he isn't sleeping again as he sits on the bed trying to understand what is happening. The protagonist asks why she is entering his room as if it were normal, showing outrage at the situation. She gets angry at being caught in the act and says she didn't like his attitude, showing anger and frustration, and explodes with anger, making it clear that she is not at all happy about being discovered again and prepares to react. The protagonist is slapped in the face, which becomes swollen, and apologizes, saying that he needs his face to continue living. He says her name and asks what she is doing there, mentioning that the other apprentice has already gone to take care of the bills, showing fear. The girl responds by saying that there is something wrong with his soul, making it clear that she realizes that he is different. She looks at him and asks if he is not from this world, revealing that she discovered his secret somehow. The protagonist realizes that she knows and starts trying to justify himself, nervously looking for an explanation that makes sense. She says she saw a lot of things in his mind and needs to investigate further, using soul searching again, showing distrust. He gets scared and asks why she is talking about his mind, while he feels ashamed of having his thoughts exposed. The apprentice kicks him in the leg and asks what he saw in her mind, making it clear that she is very angry. He thinks his mind is clear with nothing inappropriate, showing that he doesn't understand why there is so much reaction. She becomes even more irritated, saying that it is nothing like he is imagining, and seems to be embarrassed by the situation. Her eyes light up and she says he got it right, but she's not going to let it go cheap by showing an exaggerated reaction. The protagonist asks her to wait and suggests they talk while she approaches with the whip, looking very furious. He says that if she kills him, she will no longer be able to look into her mind, desperately trying to convince her to stop. She says she never wanted to look into her mind, she was just investigating, and she seems confused by everything that is happening. He takes advantage of the chance smiles and proposes a deal, showing that he is trying to change the game cleverly. His friends ask him if he has had success with his cultivation techniques, but he replies that he hasn't yet, with the exception of one who noticed energy. In the end, he reflects on the world of cultivation and leaves a message about how powerful science and information are. He says he is from another world and presents himself as a fallen prince trying to justify his origins and asking for help, reacting to surprise and letting out a huh. She making it clear that she didn't expect to hear something like that and that she is intrigued. He explains that he came from a place with different cultivation and civilization, showing confidence in his history. She says this story sounds like something she's heard before and asks if he has any proof showing that he still doubts it. The protagonist asks if the visions she had in his mind serve as evidence, leaving the question hanging in the air. The girl is surprised and begins to question whether what she saw is really real, remembering the scenes she witnessed. He asks a somewhat sarcastic question, asking if she saw anything inappropriate when she looked into his mind. To prove what he says, he hands over the chipped token, saying that it should serve as proof. She takes the token and evaluates it, trying to find out if it really proves his story. After looking, she says that the token is worn out, has lost its original energy, and is not useful as proof. The girl apologizes and says she took the wrong token, offering something different to try to prove his story. She looks at the device in his hand and asks what it is, showing curiosity about the cell phone. He puts his cell phone on the table, saying he will prove everything by showing the technology of the world he came from. The cell phone screen turns on and shows tools and icons shining with various system functions. He opens the file section and shows photos, videos, music, documents, and more, leaving her confused with so many things. The screen is full of folders and strange names she tries to understand, but seems lost with so much information. Suddenly, he points to some pixelated images and asks if that was what she saw in his mind. He claims everything is real and not a hallucination as she stares at her cell phone, gaping at the technology. She takes the device in her hands, full of curiosity, but still with doubts about everything he is saying. After looking for a while, she asks how he can be a prince from another world and have no cultivation. He explains that he lost all his power while traveling between worlds and needs her help to regain his strength and ascend. She says she thought he was weird, but now she sees that he is a prince in trouble, showing surprise and a little empathy, and realizes that he and the apprentice used the same speech about princes and rewards, leaving the protagonist confused. Remembering that the bills for the enclosure are still pending, and that the apprentice has already left, wondering what he is going to do. She asks if he as a prince knows how to solve the bill problem, demonstrating a mix of confidence and defiance, and says that if he doesn't resolve it, she will also be punished, and that he won't get away with it by showing that he won't ease. A notification sound interrupts the conversation as he pulls out his phone and appears to have a brilliant idea. The protagonist looks at the device and says that the results have already arrived, with a smile of someone who knows they have a solution. He promises to show some of the magic of modern technology, making it clear that he will use his knowledge to help. With great confidence, he says that he can now go and see the records, ready to solve everything with intelligence and sagacity. The protagonist asks if the apprentice has already handed in all the account books, making it clear that you are ready to start solving the problem. She says the books are hundreds of years old and it's impossible to read them all in a few days, showing that you are worried. He responds that they don't need everything, only from the last 10 years, showing your intelligence and solution focus, and explains that he charged his cell phone, took photos of the books, and asked Dashwan to organize everything, showing that he was ready. He says that modern technology makes analysis easier and explains how information can be processed quickly. A graph appears showing that the numbers don't add up and that the price of feed has risen strangely, indicating a problem. He concludes that someone is tampering with the purchases and now solves the mystery, showing that you have everything under control. The girl is surprised by his speed, saying he can barely get through 3 pages without wanting to sleep, impressed. She asks if they should report the oldest apprentice, but he suggests that the best thing is to go after him and get what was stolen. He also comments that he finds it strange that the bills don't resolve themselves, showing that you are used to fairer systems. An airplane flies in a blue sky, indicating that the protagonist has returned to the real world, with the word Earth at the top. A character takes a deep breath and says he can feel something, indicating an important discovery for the character. The character notices a faint presence of spiritual energy around him, feeling that there is something different in the world, and is sitting in a meditation position and wonders if the earth can support cultivation as well, showing surprise. But I can only tell you what happened if you leave a like and subscribe to the channel.